Elena felt the small red light land on her husband's forehead before she understood what she was seeing. The music was playing. The guests were clapping. Marcus was smiling at her, his hand warm on her waist, spinning her slowly under the string lights. And there, just above his eyebrows, sat a tiny red dot that did not belong at a wedding. Her heart stopped for one full second. She knew that dot. She had seen it once before, years ago, in a life she had tried very hard to forget. It was not a trick of the light. It was not a reflection from a phone camera. It was the mark of a rifle scope, the kind used by someone who had already decided what would happen next. Elena did not scream. She did not freeze. Years of instinct that she had buried under new dresses, new songs, and a new last name came rushing back all at once. She smiled instead, the same soft smile she had practiced for months in the mirror before this wedding, and she pulled Marcus closer, as if the dance simply called for it. "Keep smiling," she whispered against his ear, her lips barely moving. "Don't turn your head. Just trust me for the next 10 seconds. Marcus laughed softly, thinking it was part of some romantic surprise she had planned. "What are you up to?" he whispered back, amused, his hand tightening gently on her back. She did not answer right away. Instead, she turned him slightly, using the natural motion of the dance, so his back faced the far side of the garden where the light had come from. To everyone watching, it looked like a tender, practiced spin, the kind newlyweds do when they are lost in each other. Only Elena knew that she had just moved her husband out of a direct line she prayed was still closing. Her mind raced through every terrible possibility. She had left that old life behind. She had changed her name, changed her city, changed everything about herself except the fear that lived quietly in the back of her mind. She had told herself, for 3 years, that the danger was gone, that the man who once controlled her life had moved on, had forgotten her, had let her go. She had been wrong. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, his voice losing its playful edge. He had felt the change in her body, the sudden tension in her fingers, the way her breathing had shifted from calm to sharp. "Your hands are shaking." "I need you to trust me," she said again, keeping her tone soft, keeping her face relaxed, keeping the illusion alive for the 80 guests watching their first dance. "In a few seconds, I am going to guide you toward the tent on the left. Just follow my lead like we rehearsed. Smile like we rehearsed." They had rehearsed nothing like this, of course, but Marcus did not know that yet. He nodded slowly, confused but willing, because in the 6 months since they had fallen in love, he had learned that Elena rarely panicked over nothing. If her voice had this edge, there was a reason, even if he could not see it. The band continued playing a slow song about lasting love, unaware that beneath the music, a woman was fighting to save the man she had just promised her whole life to. Elena spun him one more time, angling her body so that she stood between Marcus and the tree line beyond the garden wall, the place where, years ago, she remembered a man teaching her exactly how far these small red lights could reach, and exactly how little warning a person got before it was too late. Victor, she thought, and the name alone made her stomach twist. She had not said it in 3 years. She had not let herself think it in months. But she recognized the pattern of that light instantly, because she had once been trained, gently and terribly, to recognize exactly this. Marcus felt her guide him step by step, her hand pressing lightly on his back, turning him degree by degree until the tense white canvas stood solidly behind him, blocking any line of sight from the garden's edge. He did not understand why she suddenly wanted to dance nearer the food tables, but he followed anyway, his eyes locked on hers, searching for answers she was not yet ready to give. "You're scaring me a little," he admitted quietly, still smiling for the sake of the crowd, still moving in time with the music. "Is someone here? Did something happen?" "Not yet," she said, "and I am going to make sure it doesn't." Her sister Charlotte, standing near the dessert table with a glass of wine, noticed something odd in Elena's expression and began walking closer, her smile fading into concern. Elena caught her eye for half a second and gave the smallest shake of her head, a signal from childhood that meant, "Stay calm, stay where you are, don't ask yet." Charlotte, sensing the seriousness behind that tiny gesture, stopped walking and instead pulled out her phone, ready for whatever her sister might need. Elena guided Marcus one final step until they stood fully behind the tent's support pole, out of any direct sight line from where the light had come. Only then did she allow herself one full breath. "Okay," she whispered, resting her forehead briefly against his chest, her heart still hammering. "Okay, we're safer here." "Safer from what?" Marcus asked, his voice low and steady despite the confusion swirling behind his eyes. "Elena, look at me. What is going on?" She looked up at him, and for the first time since they had met, he saw real fear behind her eyes, a fear that had nothing to do with wedding nerves, or spilled cake, or forgotten vows. This was older, deeper, the kind of fear a person only carries when they have survived something and spent years hoping they would never have to survive it again. "There is someone here who wants to hurt you," she said simply, "and it might be because of me." The words landed heavily between them, cutting through the music, the laughter, the soft glow of the evening lights strung above the garden. Marcus opened his mouth to ask a dozen questions, but Elena placed a gentle hand on his chest, silencing him. "Not now," she said. "I need you to stay right here, stay smiling, and let me handle the next few minutes. Can you do that for me?" He studied her face for a long moment, torn between confusion and trust. In the end, trust won, the same trust that had made him propose to her after only 8 months. The same trust that told him this woman, whoever she had been before they met, would never let harm come to him without a fight. "Okay," he said quietly, "I trust you." Elena nodded, straightened her shoulders, and turned toward the garden's edge, scanning the shadows beyond the string lights with the practiced calm of someone who had once been taught, against her will, exactly how to survive a night like this. The music continued, the guests kept dancing, and somewhere in the darkness past the garden wall, a man who refused to let Elena go watched the newlyweds slip out of view, already planning his next move. Elena's mind flashed back for just a moment, unwillingly, to a cold evening years ago, when she had stood on a balcony overlooking a quiet street, and a man beside her had pointed to a rooftop far in the distance. He had shown her, almost proudly, how a single point of red light could travel farther than most people ever imagined, and how by the time someone noticed it, there was rarely enough time left to react. She had been young then, and frightened, and she had promised herself she would never again stand near anyone who lived that way. Now here she was, married only 20 minutes, already standing between her husband and the same kind of danger she thought she had escaped forever. She pushed the memory away and focused on the present. Her cousin Henry, who worked in private security and had been hired quietly for the evening under the excuse of parking coordination, caught her eye from across the lawn. She lifted 2 fingers slightly, a signal they had agreed on months earlier, back when Elena had insisted, without fully explaining why, that the wedding needed at least one person watching the perimeter. Henry had thought it was simple caution from a woman who liked control. Now he understood it was something else entirely. He moved quietly toward the garden's edge, speaking low into a small radio clipped inside his jacket, careful not to alarm any of the guests still swaying to the music. Charlotte, still holding her wine glass, drifted casually toward the tent, her phone held low at her side, already dialing a number Elena had given her only for emergencies. Marcus watched all of this unfold in confused silence, piecing together, moment by moment, that his new wife had prepared for a threat he never knew existed. He wanted to demand answers immediately, but something in her expression told him this was not the moment. Whatever explanation she owed him, it would have to wait until the immediate danger had passed. The band shifted into another slow song, and a few guests began drifting toward the dance floor again, unaware that anything unusual had happened at all. To them, the newlyweds had simply stepped aside for a quiet, private moment, the kind every bride and groom deserved on their wedding night. Only a handful of people standing near that tent knew otherwise. Elena took Marcus's hand firmly in hers, guiding him one step further behind the canvas wall, her eyes still scanning the tree line beyond the garden. Somewhere out there, a man who had once controlled every part of her life was watching, waiting, and refusing to accept that she had built a future without him. She had spent 3 years running from her past. Tonight, her past had finally caught up with her wedding. And nobody standing under those string lights, laughing and dancing without a single worry, could have imagined what Elena was about to whisper into her husband's ear only moments later. Words that would change everything he thought he understood about the woman he had promised to spend forever with. Elena drew Marcus deeper into the shadow of the tent, away from the glow of the string lights, and pressed her lips close to his ear one more time. Her voice was barely a breath, but every word landed with weight. "His name is Victor," she whispered. "Years ago, before I ever met you, I was with him. Not the way you and I are together. He controlled everything, and when I finally left, he told me he would never let me belong to anyone else. I thought it was over. I thought he had moved on. I was wrong, and I am so sorry I never told you." Marcus said nothing at first. His jaw tightened, his eyes searching hers in the dim light, trying to reconcile the calm, steady woman he had fallen in love with against this sudden confession of a hidden and dangerous past. He had always sensed there were parts of Elena's history she guarded carefully, but he had respected her privacy, assuming it was simply pain from an old relationship, nothing more. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and hurt. "Because I wanted to forget it ever happened," she said. "Because I believed, truly believed, that if I built a new life far enough away, none of it would ever touch you. I was wrong, and now you're standing here because of a decision I made to stay silent." Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing himself to set aside his shock for the moment. Whatever anger or confusion he felt could wait. Right now, there was something more urgent standing between them and safety. "What do we do?" he asked. "We wait for Henry," Elena said. "He's already moving toward the tree line. My sister is on the phone with people who can help. We stay right here, out of sight, until it's safe to move." Across the lawn, Henry crouched low behind a row of hedges, scanning the darkness beyond the property's edge with practiced eyes. He had spent years working private security details for wealthy families who wanted quiet protection, without obvious guards standing around in suits. He recognized immediately, from Elena's earlier signal, that this was no drill, no overreaction from a nervous bride. Something real had triggered her warning, and his instincts told him to trust her completely. He spotted a faint shift in the shadows near an old oak tree, just past the garden's stone wall, a shape that did not belong among the natural sway of branches in the evening breeze. Whoever stood there had positioned themselves carefully, choosing a spot with a clear line toward the dance floor, patient and still, the way only someone trained and determined would wait. Henry lifted his radio and spoke low. Possible individual near the northeast tree line, non-uniform silhouette, motionless. Requesting backup before approach. Within moments, 2 more men, hired quietly for the evening under Elena's insistence months earlier, moved into position along the property's edges, their presence unnoticed by the guests who remained blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. To them, this was simply a beautiful summer evening, filled with music, laughter, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Charlotte, meanwhile, had reached emergency contacts that Elena had given her only for situations exactly like this one, a private line connected to people who had once helped Elena disappear from her old life entirely. The voice on the other end did not sound surprised. It sounded instead like someone who had feared this call might come one day. "Is she safe right now?" the voice asked calmly. "For the moment," Charlotte replied, glancing nervously toward the tent where her sister stood hidden with Marcus. "But there's someone out there." Elena recognized the signal immediately. "Tell her to stay exactly where she is," the voice instructed. "Someone is already on the way." Charlotte relayed the message through a discreet nod toward Elena, who caught the gesture from across the lawn and understood without needing words. Help was coming, but every second until it arrived felt impossibly long. Inside the tent, Marcus studied his wife's face, searching for the woman he thought he had fully known. What he found instead was someone sharper, more alert, and far more capable than he had ever imagined. Someone who had clearly survived circumstances he could not begin to picture. "How long were you with him?" Marcus asked quietly, unable to stop himself from wanting answers even now. "Almost 2 years," Elena admitted. "I met him when I was young and lost, not long after losing my parents. He seemed protective at first, attentive, generous. It took me a long time to understand that what looked like care was actually control. By the time I saw it clearly, leaving felt impossible." "But you left," Marcus said. "I did, she replied, with help from people who understood exactly how dangerous he was. I built a completely new life after that. New city, new name for a while, new everything. I believed I had left every trace of that world behind me. Until tonight, Marcus said softly. Until tonight, she agreed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, though her voice remained steady. I am so sorry that my past has put you in danger. If anything happened to you because of decisions I made years ago, I don't know how I would live with myself. Marcus reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers despite the fear still coursing through both of them. You just saved my life on our wedding day, he said. Whatever you were running from before, right now you're the reason I'm still standing here. We'll talk about everything else later. Right now, let's just get through tonight. Elena nodded, grateful beyond words for his steadiness, in a moment that could easily have shattered someone less understanding. She had feared, more than anything, that revealing her past would cause him to see her differently, to doubt the woman he had married only an hour earlier. Instead, in the middle of genuine danger, he was choosing to stand beside her. Outside, Henry and his team moved with careful precision along the tree line, closing in on the figure they had spotted earlier. The person, sensing movement nearby, shifted position slightly, drawing back deeper into the shadows, clearly aware that they were no longer unnoticed. He's moving, Henry whispered into his radio, heading west along the fence line, staying low. Copy, came the reply. We're cutting him off before the road. Inside the reception area, the wedding planner, a cheerful woman named Grace who had organized countless events over the years, noticed the missing bride and groom and began scanning the crowd with mild concern. She approached Charlotte, still holding her phone, and asked quietly if everything was all right. Everything's fine, Charlotte said smoothly, her years of watching her sister navigate difficult situations, giving her the composure to lie convincingly. They just wanted a private moment before the toasts. They'll be back shortly. Grace nodded, satisfied, and returned to coordinating the evening's schedule, completely unaware of the quiet crisis unfolding just beyond the tent's canvas walls. Meanwhile, the man in the shadows, recognizing that his position had been compromised, made a decision. Rather than retreat entirely, he began moving closer to the property, using the darkness of the surrounding trees for cover, determined not to leave without accomplishing what he had come to do. Years of controlling Elena's life had convinced him that she belonged to him, regardless of whatever new husband she had chosen, and that belief had only grown more twisted with every year she stayed away. Henry caught sight of him again near a service gate at the edge of the property, and this time, there was no hesitation. He signaled his team to close in from both sides, cutting off any path of escape while keeping enough distance to avoid alerting him too soon. Back inside the tent, Elena felt her phone vibrate softly in the small pocket sewn into her wedding dress, a detail she had insisted on months earlier despite her mother's confusion over why a bride would need pockets at all. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Charlotte. Henry has him in sight. Stay where you are. Almost done. Elena exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding, and showed Marcus the message. His shoulders relaxed slightly, though the tension in his jaw remained. This has been quite a wedding, he said, attempting a small, tired smile despite everything. I promise our anniversary will be much quieter, Elena replied, managing a faint laugh despite the fear still lingering beneath her calm exterior. For a moment, standing together behind the tent, they allowed themselves a small breath of normalcy, two people who had just survived something neither of them fully understood yet, holding on to each other while the world outside slowly resolved itself. Outside, near the service gate, Henry and his team moved in quickly and quietly, catching the intruder before he could reach the edge of the property line, where a car waited with its engine running. The confrontation was brief, controlled, and over, almost before it began, ending with the man restrained and the immediate danger finally neutralized. Henry radioed back to Charlotte with 3 simple words. It's handled. Safe. Charlotte's knees nearly buckled with relief as she relayed the message toward the tent, watching Elena's face shift from tightly controlled fear into something closer to disbelief that the ordeal was truly over. Marcus watched his wife absorb the news, saw the tension drain slowly from her shoulders, and understood, perhaps for the first time, just how much strength it had taken for her to remain calm through every second of the crisis. She had spent the last 20 minutes protecting him without a single visible crack in her composure, guiding him to safety, while carrying the weight of a past she had never wanted him to know. "It's over," Elena whispered, more to herself than to him, as though she needed to hear the words spoken aloud to fully believe them. "For now," Marcus said gently, "but I think we still have a lot to talk about." Elena nodded, knowing he was right. The danger outside the tent might have passed, but the truth of everything she had hidden for years still waited to be fully explained, and she owed him every piece of it, no matter how difficult the telling would be. As they finally stepped back out from behind the tent's canvas walls, the band still playing softly in the background, none of the guests noticed anything unusual at all. To them, the bride and groom had simply stepped away for a quiet moment before rejoining their celebration, smiling and relaxed as they returned to the dance floor. Only Elena, Marcus, Charlotte, and Henry knew how close disaster had come to ruining what should have been the happiest night of their lives, and only they understood that the real conversation, the one that would determine whether this marriage could survive its first true test, was still waiting to happen once the last guest went home. By the time the last dance ended and the guests began drifting toward their cars, laughing about cake and toasts and nothing more serious than a groom who had spilled wine on his jacket, two quiet vehicles waited near the service entrance at the back of the property. Local officers, called discreetly by Henry's contacts rather than through the main event, had taken custody of the man near the service gate without a single guest noticing the exchange. Elena and Marcus slipped away from the final farewells, long enough to meet Henry near the parking area, where a tall officer named Daniel stood beside his vehicle, reviewing details on a small tablet. He looked up as they approached, his expression professional but not unkind. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Elena directly, "we have him confirmed. Victor Hale. Matches the description, and the old case file flagged under your previous identity. He's been under a restraining order in another state for the past 2 years, one he apparently violated the moment he learned about tonight." Elena's stomach tightened at the sound of his full name spoken aloud for the first time in years. Hearing it here, outside her own wedding, made the entire ordeal feel painfully real, in a way that whispered warnings on the dance floor had not quite managed. "How did he even know where to find me?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the unease behind it. Daniel glanced briefly at his tablet before answering. "We're still working that out. It's possible he tracked details through old mutual contacts, or possibly through social media posts from guests, tagging the venue in the weeks leading up to today. These situations are rarely simple." Marcus placed a steadying hand on Elena's lower back, grounding her as the weight of the evening continued settling over both of them. "What happens now?" he asked. "He'll be held overnight and processed formally in the morning," Daniel explained. "Given the restraining order violation and the nature of tonight's incident, this won't be treated lightly. You'll likely need to give a formal statement sometime this week, but for tonight, you're both safe, and that's what matters most." Elena thanked him quietly, her mind already spinning ahead to the paperwork, the statements, the inevitable questions from family members who had noticed the newlyweds' brief disappearance during the reception. None of that, however, felt as pressing as the conversation she still owed Marcus, one that could no longer wait until morning. They said quiet goodbyes to Henry, who promised to handle any lingering details with the venue staff, and made their way back toward the small cottage rented for their wedding night, tucked at the edge of the property among quiet trees and soft lantern light. The walk there felt longer than usual, filled with a silence neither of them quite knew how to break. Once inside, Marcus closed the door behind them and turned to face her fully, his tuxedo jacket discarded over a chair, his tie loosened at his throat. "Tell me everything," he said gently. "Not the short version you gave me by the tent. All of it." Elena sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, gathering her thoughts before beginning. "I met Victor when I was 22, she said. "I had just lost both my parents within the same year, a car accident that left me completely alone, no siblings besides Charlotte, who was still finishing school overseas at the time. I was lost, grieving, and desperate for someone to make me feel safe again." Marcus sat beside her, listening without interrupting, giving her the space to tell the story at her own pace. "He seemed perfect at first," she continued. "Attentive, generous, always making sure I had everything I needed. It took months before I noticed how carefully he controlled who I spoke to, where I went, even what I wore. By the time I recognized the pattern, I had already isolated myself from most of my old friends, convinced by him that they didn't truly care about me the way he did. "How did you finally leave?" Marcus asked quietly. "An old professor of mine noticed the change in me during a chance meeting at a coffee shop," Elena said. She asked enough gentle questions that I finally admitted how frightened I had become. She connected me with a support organization that helped people leave controlling relationships safely. It took almost 6 months of careful planning before I could actually walk away without alerting him beforehand. "And after you left?" "I moved twice in the first year alone," Elena said. "Changed jobs, changed my number, eventually changed my legal name for a period before switching back once enough time had passed. I truly believed, after the restraining order was granted and 2 years passed without incident, that he had finally accepted it was over." Marcus reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before tonight?" Elena's eyes glistened, though she kept her voice steady. "Because I was ashamed," she admitted, "not of leaving him, but of ever having let myself become so controlled in the first place. I worried that if you knew how vulnerable I had once been, you might see me differently, might worry constantly about my safety, might even hesitate to build a life with someone carrying that kind of history." "Elena," Marcus said softly, tilting her chin gently so their eyes met, "nothing about tonight has changed how much I love you. If anything, watching you protect me the way you did, staying calm, thinking clearly, guiding us both to safety, has only shown me how strong you truly are. You survived something terrible and built an entirely new life from it. That isn't something to be ashamed of." Tears finally slipped down Elena's cheeks, the emotional weight of the entire evening breaking through the composure she had maintained since first spotting that red dot. Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her quietly while she let herself feel everything she had been forced to suppress during the crisis. "I should have told you before the wedding," she whispered against his shoulder. "You deserve to know what you might be walking into." "Maybe," Marcus admitted honestly, "but I understand why you didn't. And honestly, nothing you could have told me would have changed my answer when you asked me to marry you. I love you, Elena, all of you, including the parts of your past you were still learning to make peace with." They stayed like that for a long while, the events of the evening finally settling into something they could begin processing together rather than alone. Outside, the wedding venue grew quiet as the last vehicles pulled away, the string lights slowly dimming for the night, leaving behind only the soft chirp of crickets and the distant hum of a world that had no idea how close tragedy had come to touching two people simply trying to start their life together. The following morning brought its own complications. Elena and Charlotte sat across from Daniel at a small local station, giving detailed statements about the events leading up to and during the incident. Charlotte, still shaken from the previous night, recounted every detail of the emergency call and the tense minutes waiting for updates from Henry. "We found something else you should know about," Daniel said carefully, once the formal statement had concluded. "Victor wasn't acting entirely alone last night." Elena's blood ran cold at the words. "What do you mean?" "We found communications on his phone with another individual, someone who helped him track the wedding location and provided information about the property's layout. We're still identifying who that person is, but given the coordination involved, this wasn't simply an impulsive decision on his part. This was planned." The revelation hit Elena harder than she expected. She had assumed, foolishly perhaps, that Victor had acted alone in his obsession, a single desperate man refusing to accept that she had moved on. The idea that someone else had knowingly assisted him added a new and unsettling layer to an already terrifying situation. "Do you have any idea who it could be?" Elena asked, her voice tight with concern. "Not yet," Daniel admitted, "but we're taking it seriously. Until we identify this second individual, I'd recommend maintaining heightened caution, particularly around your home address and daily routines." Elena left the station that morning with a knot of anxiety settling permanently in her stomach, the relief of the previous night's resolution, replaced by a new and uncertain fear. If Victor had help, that meant someone close enough to know details about her wedding, someone who might still be watching, still waiting for another opportunity. She and Marcus discussed the unsettling news together that evening, weighing whether to delay their honeymoon or press forward with their plans despite the lingering uncertainty. In the end, they decided that hiding indefinitely would only give the unknown accomplice more power over their lives, and they resolved instead to remain vigilant while refusing to let fear dictate every decision moving forward. In the days that followed, Elena found herself looking over her shoulder in ways she had not done since the earliest months after leaving Victor. Small things unsettled her now. A car parked too long outside her apartment building, a delivery she had not ordered, a wrong number call that ended before she could answer. She told herself repeatedly that she was simply on edge after everything that had happened, yet the unease refused to fade. Marcus noticed the change in her, almost immediately. He had taken a short leave from his work as an architect to stay close to her during the days following the wedding, and he watched quietly as she checked the door locks twice before bed, as she kept her phone within reach at all times, as she flinched slightly whenever an unfamiliar name appeared on a call. "Talk to me," he said one evening, finding her standing at the kitchen window, watching the street below with an intensity that told him her mind was far from the quiet apartment they shared. "I keep thinking about what Daniel said," Elena admitted, "about someone helping Victor plan everything. If someone close enough to know our wedding details helped him, that means someone I trust, or at least someone connected to people I trust, might have been involved." "Have you thought about who it could be?" Marcus asked carefully. Elena hesitated before answering. "There's only a small circle of people who knew the exact venue and timing months in advance. My wedding planner, a few close friends, my aunt who helped with invitations, and Charlotte, obviously, though I trust her completely. Beyond that, the guest list itself wasn't public until closer to the date." "What about anyone from your old life?" Marcus asked gently. "Anyone who might have stayed in contact with Victor even after you left?" The question settled uncomfortably in Elena's mind. She thought back through the people she had known during those 2 difficult years, most of whom had drifted away entirely once she disappeared from that world. One name, however, resurfaced with uncomfortable clarity, a woman named Nicole, who had once been close to both Elena and Victor, someone Elena had assumed simply lost touch after the relationship ended. "There was someone," Elena said slowly, "a friend from that time. I haven't spoken to her in years, but she knew Victor well, better than most people did. I always wondered why she never reached out again after I left, especially since we had been close before everything fell apart." "Do you think she could be involved?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Elena admitted honestly, "but it's worth mentioning to Daniel. If anyone still had reason to help Victor track me down, it might be someone from that circle, someone who never fully let go of that world the way I tried to." The following morning, Elena contacted Daniel and shared Nicole's name, along with what limited information she remembered about their old connection. Daniel promised to look into any possible link, cautioning Elena not to draw conclusions too quickly without evidence, though he acknowledged the lead was worth pursuing given the circumstances. Meanwhile, life attempted to resume some semblance of normalcy. Elena returned briefly to her work as a graphic designer, though concentration proved difficult with so much uncertainty hanging over her. Marcus resumed his architecture projects, though he found himself checking his phone constantly throughout the day, needing reassurance that Elena remained safe while he was away from home. Charlotte visited often during this period, offering support and distraction in equal measure, though even she seemed more watchful than usual, glancing frequently toward windows and doors whenever they sat together in Elena's apartment. A week after the wedding, Daniel called with an update that neither Elena nor Marcus expected. "We've confirmed contact between Victor and a woman matching the description you gave us," he said. "Phone records show communication going back several months before your wedding, discussing details that only someone close to your circle could have known." Elena's breath caught. So it was her. Nicole helped him. "We believe so," Daniel confirmed. "However, she hasn't been located yet. Her last known address turned out to be outdated, and she appears to have left her previous job around the same time Victor's communications with her increased in frequency." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, his protective instincts sharpening at the news. "It means we need to proceed carefully," Daniel said. "If she assisted Victor in planning something as significant as your wedding, there's a possibility she remains motivated to help him further, especially now that he's facing formal charges. I'd strongly recommend increased caution until we can locate her and understand her intentions." The news settled heavily over the small apartment that evening. transforming what had felt like a resolved crisis into an ongoing and uncertain threat. Elena sat quietly on the couch, processing the idea that someone she had once considered a friend had spent months quietly helping the man who once controlled her life locate her again. Why would she do this? Elena asked, more to herself than to Marcus, struggling to understand the betrayal layered atop an already painful history. Maybe loyalty to him, Marcus suggested carefully, or maybe something else entirely that we don't understand yet. Either way, we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Elena nodded, steeling herself once again for a fight she had believed, only days earlier, was finally behind her. She had survived the wedding. She had survived the confrontation near the garden's edge. But as the days passed and Nicole remained missing, Elena understood, with a growing sense of dread, that the true danger might have only just begun. 2 weeks after the wedding, Elena and Marcus finally decided to take the short honeymoon they had originally planned, a quiet week at a lakeside cabin, several hours outside the city. Daniel had cautiously approved the trip, noting that a change of location, kept private and shared only with immediate family, might actually offer a safer environment than remaining in their usual routine, where patterns could be tracked more easily. The cabin belonged to a distant relative of Marcus, tucked along a quiet stretch of shoreline surrounded by pine trees, far from the busy roads and crowded neighborhoods of the city. For the first 2 days, Elena finally allowed herself to relax, walking along the water's edge with Marcus in the mornings, cooking simple meals together in the small kitchen, falling asleep without the constant tension that had gripped her since the wedding. On the third evening, as the sun began setting behind the tree line, Elena stepped outside to collect firewood from the small shed near the cabin, humming quietly to herself, more at peace than she had felt in weeks. It was there, crouched beside the woodpile, that she heard a voice she had not heard in over 3 years. "You look happy," Nicole said quietly from the shadows near the tree line. "I wasn't sure you remembered how to be." Elena froze, her hand still resting on a piece of firewood, her heart suddenly pounding as she turned slowly to face the woman who had once been her closest confidant during the darkest years of her life. Nicole looked different now, thinner, tired, dressed in clothes that suggested she had been traveling for some time without proper rest. "Nicole," Elena said carefully, straightening slowly, keeping her voice steady, despite the sudden fear coursing through her. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk," Nicole said, stepping closer, her hands visible and empty, though her presence alone felt like a threat, given everything Elena now knew about her involvement in the wedding incident. "Just talk, Elena. I owe you that much at least." "You helped him," Elena said, unable to keep the hurt and anger from her voice. "You helped Victor find me. After everything I went through to get away from him, you helped him track down my wedding." Nicole's expression flickered with something like shame, though it quickly hardened into a defensive coldness. "You don't understand what it was like," she said. "After you left, he became obsessed, convinced that if he could just talk to you one more time, explain himself properly, you would understand that he never meant to hurt you the way you believed. I thought, if I helped him find you, helped him see you happy and moved on, he might finally accept it and leave both of us alone." "That's not why you did it," Elena said, disbelief coloring her tone. "If you truly thought that, you would have told me directly instead of secretly feeding him information about my wedding for months." Nicole's composure cracked slightly under the accusation. "I was afraid of him too," she admitted quietly. "After you left, he turned his attention to me instead. Small things at first, then more control, more demands. I thought helping him find closure with you might finally free me from his hold as well. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, Elena. I swear that." Elena studied her old friend carefully, torn between anger at the betrayal and an unexpected flicker of sympathy for a woman who had apparently fallen into the exact same trap Elena herself had once escaped. Still, sympathy did not erase the danger Nicole's actions had created. "You need to leave," Elena said firmly, "and you need to tell the authorities everything you know, including where you've been staying and who else might be involved. If you're truly trying to free yourself from him, this is how you do it, not by showing up unannounced at my honeymoon." Nicole's eyes filled with tears, though whether from fear, guilt, or simple exhaustion, Elena could not be certain. "I didn't come here to hurt you," she said softly. "I came because I didn't know where else to go." He's out on bail now, Elena. Someone posted it 2 days ago, and he's already looking for me, angry that I spoke to the police at all. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. She had assumed, wrongly it seemed, that Victor would remain in custody while awaiting trial. The idea that he was already free again, angry and searching for the woman who had exposed his plans, sent a fresh wave of fear through her entire body. "He's out?" Elena repeated, her voice tight with alarm. "Since yesterday," Nicole confirmed. "I've been running since then, trying to figure out where to go. I know I have no right to ask you for help after everything I've done, but I didn't know who else might understand what he's capable of." Before Elena could respond, the sound of a car engine cut through the quiet evening air, distant but unmistakable, approaching along the narrow dirt road leading toward the cabin. Both women froze, exchanging a look of shared dread as the realization settled between them. "He followed you," Elena said quietly. "I didn't think he knew where I was going," Nicole whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "I was so careful." Elena did not waste time on blame. She grabbed Nicole's arm and pulled her quickly toward the cabin, her mind racing through the same careful calculations that had guided her through the wedding crisis weeks earlier. Marcus appeared in the doorway, alerted by the sound of the approaching vehicle, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to concern as he took in Nicole's presence and Elena's urgent movements. "What's happening?" he asked. "Victor's out on bail," Elena said quickly, pulling Nicole inside and locking the door behind them. "And he might be following her right now." Marcus's face hardened immediately, years of steady calm replaced by sharp focus. "Call Daniel," he said. "I'll check the perimeter." Elena dialed quickly, her hands trembling slightly as the phone rang. Daniel answered on the second ring, his voice alert the moment he heard the tension in Elena's tone. "Victor's out on bail and possibly headed toward our location," Elena explained rapidly. "Nicole showed up here, and now there's a vehicle approaching. Stay inside, lock every door, and stay away from windows," Daniel instructed immediately. "I'm alerting local authorities near your location right now. Keep your phone line open if you can." Marcus moved quickly through the small cabin, checking each window and securing the back door, his movements steady despite the adrenaline clearly coursing through him. Nicole sat trembling on the edge of the couch, guilt and fear mixing visibly across her face as she realized the full weight of the danger her actions had ultimately created. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to come to this." "We'll deal with that later," Elena said firmly, though not unkindly. "Right now, we need to stay calm and stay safe." The vehicle's engine grew louder outside, then abruptly cut off, leaving an unsettling silence hanging over the cabin. Marcus positioned himself near the front window, peering carefully through a gap in the curtains, watching as a car door opened slowly in the fading evening light. "It's him," Marcus confirmed quietly, his voice tight with restrained tension. "He's walking toward the cabin." Elena's grip tightened on her phone, Daniel's voice still audible on the other end, assuring her that local officers were only minutes away. Every second felt impossibly stretched as they waited. 3 people inside a small locked cabin, watching a man who refused to accept that Elena's life no longer belonged to him, approach with slow, deliberate steps. "Stay back from the door," Marcus instructed both women quietly. "Whatever happens, let the authorities handle this. We just need to hold on a few more minutes." Outside, Victor stopped a few feet from the cabin's entrance, his expression unreadable in the dim evening light, seemingly unaware or unconcerned that his approach had already been noticed. He raised his hand slowly toward the door, and in that suspended moment, the distant sound of approaching sirens finally broke through the silence, growing louder with each passing second. Victor froze, his head turning sharply toward the sound, calculation flickering across his features as he weighed his rapidly narrowing options. For a moment, it seemed he might turn and run back toward his car, disappearing once again into whatever shadows he had been hiding within for the past 2 days. Instead, he remained still, watching the cabin with an expression that Elena, peering carefully through the window beside Marcus, recognized instantly from years earlier, the look of a man who believed, even now, that he still held some claim over her life. The sirens grew closer, and within moments, flashing lights illuminated the narrow dirt road leading toward the cabin, cutting through the darkness that had settled fully over the lake. Victor remained motionless, watching the approaching vehicles with a strange, resigned calm, as though some part of him had known all along that this moment would eventually arrive. Officers moved quickly once they arrived, and this time, there was no confusion, no uncertainty about the danger Victor represented. Given his violation of the earlier restraining order, and now his violation of bail conditions by leaving the designated area, his second arrest that month proceeded swiftly and without incident. Nicole, still trembling on the couch inside, agreed without hesitation to provide a full statement once officers arrived at the cabin, detailing every piece of information she held about Victor's actions, his plans, and the extent of her own involvement, however reluctant it may have initially been. As the flashing lights finally faded into the distance, carrying Victor away for what everyone hoped would be the final time, Elena sank onto the cabin's small porch steps, exhaustion washing over her in heavy waves. Marcus sat beside her immediately, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, both of them staring out at the dark lake in stunned silence. "I think it's really over now," Elena said quietly, though the words felt fragile even as she spoke them. "I think so too," Marcus agreed, pulling her closer. "But whatever happens next, we'll face it together. That much I'm certain of." The weeks following the cabin incident brought a flurry of legal proceedings that neither Elena nor Marcus had fully anticipated when they first exchanged vows. Victor's bail was revoked entirely following his violation, and this time, the charges against him expanded significantly to include the earlier restraining order violation, the wedding incident, and now the additional charge of pursuing Nicole and appearing at a private residence despite explicit conditions barring him from approaching either woman. Elena found herself spending several afternoons at the local courthouse, meeting with a prosecutor named Peter who specialized in cases involving long-term harassment and controlling relationships. He was patient and thorough, walking Elena through every step of what the coming months would involve, from formal depositions to the eventual trial date that would determine Victor's fate for years to come. "These cases can feel overwhelming," Peter explained during one of their early meetings, "but the evidence here is unusually strong. Between the restraining order history, the wedding incident witnessed by multiple guests, and now the bail violation with an independent witness in Nicole, we have a solid foundation for a conviction." "What about Nicole?" Elena asked, still uncertain how to feel about the woman who had once been her closest friend, before becoming, however reluctantly, part of the danger that had threatened her wedding. "She's cooperating fully," Peter said, given her willingness to provide detailed statements and her own history of being controlled by Victor during the past several months. Prosecutors are recommending a significantly reduced charge for her involvement, likely resulting in probation rather than incarceration, provided she continues cooperating through the trial. Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling the familiar mixture of anger and unexpected sympathy she had experienced that evening at the cabin. Nicole had made a serious mistake, one that had genuinely endangered lives, yet she had also been a victim of the same manipulation that had once controlled Elena's own life for 2 painful years. "Do you think she deserves leniency?" Marcus asked one evening as they discussed the case over dinner in their apartment. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I think she made choices that hurt me deeply," she said. "But I also understand, better than most people could, how easily someone like Victor can convince a person that helping him is somehow the only path toward their own freedom. I don't excuse what she did, but I don't think destroying her life serves justice either." Over the following months, Elena found herself reconnecting cautiously with Nicole, not as close friends the way they had once been, but as 2 women who shared an understanding of survival that few others could fully comprehend. Their conversations remained careful and measured, built slowly around trust that had been broken and could only be rebuilt in small, deliberate steps. Meanwhile, Elena and Marcus worked together to rebuild the sense of security that had been shattered during their first weeks of marriage. They installed additional security measures at their apartment, established clear routines that made unexpected patterns harder to predict, and maintained regular contact with Daniel, who continued monitoring the case's progress, even after his initial involvement had technically concluded. Charlotte remained a steady presence throughout this period, often staying with Elena during evenings when Marcus traveled for work, the 2 sisters growing closer than they had been in years as they navigated the aftermath of an ordeal neither had expected to face. I keep thinking about that night, Charlotte admitted one evening, sitting curled on Elena's couch with a cup of tea warming her hands. How close everything came to going terribly wrong. If you hadn't noticed that light immediately, if Henry hadn't been positioned exactly where he was, things could have ended so differently. I think about it too, Elena admitted, but I also think about how it brought everyone together in ways I never expected. You, Henry, Daniel, even Marcus stepping up the way he did without fully understanding what was happening. Somehow, we all found a way through it. As autumn settled over the city, the trial date finally arrived, bringing with it a renewed wave of anxiety for everyone involved. Elena spent hours preparing her testimony with Peter, reviewing every detail of the years she had spent with Victor, the careful escape she had orchestrated, and the terrifying moment she had recognized that same danger, returning on what should have been the happiest day of her life. The trial itself lasted nearly 2 weeks, filled with testimony from multiple witnesses, including several wedding guests who had unknowingly stood nearby during the initial danger, Henry describing his security team's swift response, and Daniel outlining the pattern of behavior that had led to Victor's escalating violations. Elena's own testimony proved to be the most difficult, requiring her to relive publicly the details of a relationship she had spent years trying to move beyond. She spoke carefully and honestly about the gradual control Victor had exercised over her life, the isolation she had experienced, and the fear that had followed her even years after finally escaping. Marcus sat in the courtroom every single day, his presence a steady source of support that Elena leaned on heavily throughout the difficult proceedings. During breaks, he would find small ways to remind her that whatever happened with the verdict, their life together remained solid and unshaken by the trial's revelations. Nicole testified as well, her account corroborating much of what Elena described while adding her own painful perspective on how Victor's control had gradually expanded to consume her life as well, following Elena's initial departure. Her willingness to speak honestly about her own victimization, despite her role in the wedding incident, ultimately strengthened the prosecution's case considerably. When the verdict finally arrived, the courtroom fell into tense silence as the jury foreperson stood to deliver their decision. Victor was found guilty on all major charges, including stalking, violation of protective orders, and reckless endangerment stemming from the wedding incident. The judge, citing the pattern of escalating behavior spanning several years, sentenced him to a significant prison term, ensuring that Elena and those close to her would have years of safety before needing to consider his eventual release. Elena felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over her as the verdict was read, tears finally falling freely after months of carefully maintained composure. Marcus wrapped his arms around her immediately, holding her steady as the weight of years finally began lifting from her shoulders. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by family and the small circle of people who had supported her throughout the ordeal, Elena allowed herself, for the first time in years, to fully believe that her past no longer held the power to threaten her future. "It's really over," she said quietly, echoing the same words she had spoken months earlier at the cabin, though this time she believed them completely. "It is," Marcus confirmed, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And now we get to focus on everything ahead of us instead." In the months that followed, Elena and Marcus slowly rebuilt the sense of normalcy that had been interrupted so dramatically during their wedding celebration. They took a proper honeymoon eventually, choosing a quiet coastal town far removed from anything connected to their previous ordeal, spending 2 peaceful weeks simply enjoying each other's company, without the shadow of fear following them. Elena also began working, slowly and carefully, with a therapist who specialized in helping survivors of controlling relationships process trauma that often resurfaced unexpectedly, even years after physical danger had passed. These sessions helped her understand that the vigilance she still carried, the way she still checked locks twice or noticed unfamiliar cars parked nearby, were natural responses to genuine trauma rather than signs of ongoing weakness. "You survived something incredibly difficult," her therapist reminded her during one particularly emotional session. "And then you survived it again, in a much more public and terrifying way, on what should have been one of the happiest days of your life. It's natural that healing from that takes time." Marcus supported her fully throughout this process, attending occasional sessions together when Elena felt ready to include him, learning alongside her how to recognize the lingering effects of trauma while building new patterns of security and trust between them. Nicole, meanwhile, completed her probation successfully, using the experience to distance herself completely from the patterns of manipulation that had once controlled significant portions of her own life. She and Elena maintained a cautious but genuine friendship moving forward, built on mutual understanding rather than the naive trust that had once connected them years earlier. Henry continued working in private security, though he often mentioned, half-joking, that no assignment since Elena's wedding had ever matched the intensity of that particular evening. Daniel remained in contact occasionally, checking in periodically to ensure that Elena and Marcus continued feeling safe and settled following the trial's conclusion. A year after their wedding, Elena and Marcus hosted a small anniversary gathering. Nothing elaborate, just close family and friends sharing a quiet dinner together in their apartment. Charlotte raised a toast that evening, her voice thick with emotion as she looked around at everyone who had played a role in protecting her sister during the darkest moments of the previous year. "To second chances," Charlotte said, raising her glass, "and to the people brave enough to fight for the futures they deserve." Elena looked around the room at the faces gathered there, at Marcus beside her, steady and unwavering, exactly as he had been from the very first moment danger threatened their life together, and felt a deep and lasting gratitude settle within her chest. She thought back often to that terrifying moment on the dance floor, the tiny red light that had threatened to end everything before it truly began, and the whispered words she had used to guide her husband to safety without ever alerting the guests around them. That single moment of quick thinking, born from years of painful experience she had once wished she could simply forget, had ultimately saved not only Marcus's life, but the future they were still building together. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked quietly, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face as their small gathering continued around them. "Just how far we've come," Elena said, smiling genuinely for the first time in longer than she could remember without any lingering shadow of fear behind it. "A year ago, I thought our wedding night might be the end of everything. Instead, it became the beginning of understanding just how strong we could be together." Marcus took her hand gently, lacing his fingers through hers the same way he had done that terrifying evening behind the reception tent, though this time, the gesture carried only comfort and certainty rather than fear. "I love you," he said simply. "All of you, including every difficult chapter that brought you to this moment." "I love you too," Elena replied, resting her head against his shoulder, as their friends and family continued celebrating around them, the warm glow of their apartment, a stark and welcome contrast to the tense shadows that had once threatened to define their story. Outside, the city continued its steady rhythm, unaware of the quiet resilience that had carried this particular couple through danger, betrayal, and eventual healing toward a future they had both fought fiercely to protect. Elena no longer flinched at unfamiliar sounds outside her window, no longer felt the need to check locks obsessively before sleeping, no longer carried the constant weight of a past she believed might someday resurface without warning. She had built, alongside Marcus, something stronger than fear, a partnership tested under the most extreme circumstances imaginable and proven unshakable through every difficult moment that followed. The tiny red dot that had once threatened to end their story before it truly began had instead become the unlikely beginning of a love strong enough to withstand anything life placed before them. And as their small anniversary celebration continued late into the evening, filled with laughter, gratitude, and the quiet comfort of loved ones who had stood beside them through darkness, Elena finally allowed herself to believe, completely and without reservation, that the life she and Marcus were building together was one no shadow from the past would ever be able to threaten again.